Hello and welcome to the Who the Fuck is in the Mirror podcast. I'm Angela Spooner, your host, emotional intelligence guide, trauma-informed coach, yoga instructor, confident, badass single mom of 3 amazing children, and founder of Unabashedly You. This podcast is all about using books, analogies, and metaphors to dive deep into who you really are to yourselves, not just as parents or some fictional version others made you out to be, right? But who the fuck you are. I want you to find your confidently badass, secure version of you that you lost along the way, or maybe you never even had in the first place because you were busy with everyone and everything else. Does that sound about right? So how about we get into the science of why we are a bunch of fucked up individuals who look in the mirror and don't even recognize the person that's staring back. Join me in the best journey you'll ever experience. Why, you may ask? Because it is the journey to transform your self-doubt, insecurity, and overall dysfunctional brain into self-aware, badass confidence and understanding. I hope you're as excited as I am because I cannot wait to get into this.
Welcome to the carnival. Welcome to the carnival.
Hey everyone, how are you doing today? So today we're going to be going over chapter 4, Running for Your Life, the Anatomy of Survival. So when he starts this chapter, he talks about the Twin Towers and how they were hit. And there was a boy that witnessed it. He draws this picture, and it's the Twin Towers, and there's people jumping out of the Twin Towers, and he draws this black circle, right? And everybody's like, well, what the fuck is that? And he's like, oh, that's a trampoline so that people can jump on it when they jump out. So it's his coping mechanism, right? Which is really freaking awesome. Now, if you're raised in a safe environment, right, and your communication with your parents during this time is solid, you're able to have those conversations. The kids understand and they're able to cope with resourceful things like this, right? But what happens when you can't cope, right? So being on the edge between impulse and acceptable behavior is where most of our troubles begin. The more intense the visceral sensory input from the emotional brain, the less capacity the rational brain has to put a damper on it. So basically what Kolk is saying there is, he also says the brain is in charge of detecting danger and organizing a response to it. So basically he's saying that we're trying, right? We're trying to move through our traumas, and the more trauma that we experience, the harder it becomes to just move past it, kind of like this little boy, right? At first, it's like, yeah, okay, I can just move through it. But if you are a child that's in a situation where there's continuous trauma, or you're even an adult that's experienced a lot of trauma, basically what he says is being traumatized means continuing to organize your life as if the trauma were still going on, unchanged and immutable, as every new encounter or event is contaminated by the fucking past. He doesn't say fucking, but it's essentially contaminated by this past, right? He also says that after trauma, the world is experienced with a different nervous system, not a different new outlook, right? He's saying that the nervous system is actually different. So he says the survivor's energy now becomes focused on suppressing the inner chaos. So your reactions, your control over them, your impulses, everything comes from that. That's why people get sick, right? He mentions fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, autoimmune diseases. I had really bad heartburn. I had stomach issues for the longest, right? I mean, I had lung issues too, but I was also a smoker. So there's that. But the smoking comes from it too, right? Because we need something to cope with. Our body is literally overcome with all these emotions. He also mentions that trauma affects the entire human organism. So we're talking about body, mind, brain. In PTSD, the body continues to defend against a threat that belongs to the past. So you're constantly in this threat with PTSD. You're not able to actually communicate that this is the threat, right? So basically what's happening, and he mentions it, but basically what's happening is you have your brain, right? You have the different levels. You have the limbic system, which we'll get into that. You have the thalamus that's located inside the limbic system. You have your amygdala. You have your prefrontal cortex. So you have all these different things that are basically communicating, which we will get into. So have you ever started doing something and you didn't realize what you were doing until you're already doing it? Like, has that ever happened to you? Like maybe you ran away from a conversation that made you uncomfortable. I have been there, okay? I'm speaking from experience. So you didn't even realize that you didn't even realize what you were doing until you were actually doing it. So the reason for that is because your brain is processing. So when it starts processing in the brain, it goes down to the amygdala and the frontal lobes. So it goes in two different directions. So you get the response in your brain. And then after that, which we'll explain right now, but after that, it goes down to your amygdala. And then it goes up into your frontal lobes. However, when you have trauma, it takes a lot longer for your body to react into the frontal lobes. Now, frontal lobes, that's where we're talking about people actually realizing, okay, let's think clearly, critically, what the fuck am I actually doing, right? That's not the side that gets the response. When you have trauma, it's going down to the amygdala. It's going down, boom, amygdala. I need to fucking handle this. And we've talked about the amygdala and the emotions, right? So when you do that, it's not your fault, is what I'm trying to get at. When you want to shame yourself, you look at that and you're like, God, why did I do that again? You're organized in your brain to survive. There could be a number of reasons, right? Maybe you were held down and beat up in school, or maybe you had an abusive family member, or rape could have been a reason. You could have had domestic violence. It could have been a war zone. You could have had a car accident, for crying out loud. The reactions are still the same, where you have this is an emotion. This is my response because it knows the past. So maybe you lashed out at someone, right? And then you just walked away. And that's when you realized that it wasn't as serious of a situation. Now, this is where I'll explain it a little more, right? So the thalamus, located within the brain, in the limbic system, it's quote unquote the cook. It is the reason for this that our sensory information, such as skin, eyes, ears, nose, right, converge and essentially become an ABC soup for you to experience and say, this is what is happening to me. Once they're converged, the sensations then travel down to the amygdala, deep in the limbic system, and up the frontal lobes to the conscious awareness. So that's exactly what I was explaining, right? And then also remember the amygdala, quicker response than the frontal lobes. So our initial response is not the appropriate response, especially in traumatic situations. The frontal lobes take longer to receive extreme threats. And in some cases, the sensations we talked about, like the smell, sight, sounds, touch, they become isolated and dissociated fragments, as Colt calls them, dissociated fragments, which is true, right? This makes your processing like chaotic. And essentially what happens is time freezes so that the present danger feels like it will last forever. So that's why people with PTSD, they're constantly in that state. So the amygdala also works with the hippocampus. This is responsible for looking at the past experiences associated with the present experiences. The hippocampus will then enlist the appropriate stress hormones it feels are necessary in a situations, plus the autonomic nervous system, so the body can be in full autonomic action, okay? So in other words, I'm not trying to get you to memorize all of this. That's not the vibe. That's not what the fuck I'm trying to teach you. What I'm trying to say is that the brain has a structure. So, and it has jobs. Okay. So your amygdala, that is responsible for like the emotions, right? Is this a threat? Is this something that I need to handle, right? And the hippocampus looks at the past and associates it with the present experiences. So you're taking your past experiences and you're using those past experiences to define what you think, say, feel, all of it, how you react, everything is associated with those past experiences because that damn hippocampus, that hippo is camping on us. See what I did there? It's camping on us. It's just sitting on our past. That big ass fat hippo just sitting there on the past experiences. And then it's like, oh, by the way, we're going to use these for our present experiences. So that's when it enlists the stress hormones. Hence why we have the cortisol that just keeps getting out and out and out. Too much cortisol increases, sugar production. I mean, literally, no wonder we get these things like fibromyalgia and we get autoimmune diseases, and we get heartburn and stomach issues. Our body is like whacked out. It's like we're on drugs when we're not on drugs. And there's nothing, we're just going crazy. Like, I don't know how to fucking do this, right? So let's go back. Okay, let's go back to that adult yelling at their child again, right? You see the face of the adult and your immediate reaction is like somebody's yelling at your child. That's what I mean. Your immediate reaction is to yell at that person, right? So your past experiences could have been where someone made you feel unsafe by the way they screamed at you. That adult may not even be saying anything harsh or verbally abusive to your child, but your first response doesn't give a crap about any of that, right? Because the actions and emotions run faster than your ability to think through what really could be going on here. And it's because of those past experiences. And if we don't have parents telling us that we can just build a trampoline and save people for the future, then we just see the people jumping out of the fucking building and dying miserable, horrible, unimaginable deaths in front of our faces or on the TV since it was recorded. You know, I remember that because my mom, she turned off the TV, you know, but if we don't have that communication, then when we're older, we don't get to sit there and say, maybe that adult is not yelling because we were not taught. Our first reaction is our past experiences. So we see that person yelling and we think we're going to run over there, scream at them. And I've done that, right? Do you see what I'm trying to say? It's not your fault you screamed at the adult or at the kids or that you laughed at an awkward situation. We look at both ends of the spectrum. The thalamus takes the info, sends it to the amygdala, says, figure out the emotion. And then the hippocampus receives that response and says, let's roll, bro. Right? You know you didn't respond appropriately, but your first response was what you know and have experienced yourself. If you have a past of angry and chaotic scenarios, then you're going to have impulsive moments of anger and chaos and not be able to control it. If you grew up thinking you always had to lighten the mood because the people closest to you required you to maintain their balance, then you're going to laugh at awkward times because being the cool and collected one is your first reaction. Joking about situations is your first reaction. The more intense the situation, the stronger your reaction will be because Kolk says in high threat situations, people lose control over automatic emergency responses like prolonged startle or aggressive outbursts. You don't even have the control. Like my kids have a lot of trauma, right? And sometimes I forget that when they get angry, they lose the control, right? They have these, like my son will get these prolonged startles. My daughter will get aggressive outbursts. My other daughter gets what Kolk talks about, and she will do the depersonalization, splitting off from the self. So it's literally you're shutting down all your emotions. And so what happens with those people, depersonalization, is that basically the ones that were more verbal and chaotic, they got the more attention, right? Because that's usually what happens. The kids that are loud and like express themselves, acting out, they get the attention. The ones that are quiet don't usually get the attention because we're like, oh, we don't have to worry about them, right? Wrong. Because then they internalize, and then they watch something like Titanic. I don't know of a single person that doesn't cry watching Titanic. And my daughter didn't. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I'm literally holding my other two and myself, and I'm just bawling my eyes out, right? Especially that old couple that's like holding each other when they're inside that Titanic. You're just like, oh my God, they're gonna die. Look at them die together, you know? And she's just like looking at us. And for the longest time, I thought, like, what is wrong with this child? But it is because the other two had so many issues and were acting out more outwardly that this child kept swallowing her issues and downplaying and essentially gaslighting herself, making herself feel like it wasn't as important. And to this day, she still struggles with that of saying, she'll try and talk about something, about her feelings or whatever, and she'll say, "Oh, but that's not important." And I have to tell her, like, "No, your feelings are important. Your feelings are fucking valid, you know? And the more that you push them down, I know my oldest, she pushes stuff down, right? And I have to constantly tell her, like, you have to talk about your feelings and emotions. There is nothing more powerful than talking about your feelings and emotions, because when she does that, her overall attitude and behavior, totally fine. But when she feels like she can't be open about her feelings, her behaviors, when she feels she's not safe, or if she messes up, like she loses her temper and says something, or she acts out, and gets aggressive or something, she goes down this pit of, okay, I'm nothing. And it's because she didn't validate her feelings and heal her issues in a safe environment. You have to have a safe environment to do all of this, which again, Kolk does talk about that. It is important to deal with your issues when you are in a safe space. We'll talk about that in a little bit, okay? So let's talk a little more about the amygdala stimulating, right? Because remember, it stimulates the hippocampus, or it stimulates with the hippocampus, and then that damn hippo takes those responses, right? Sits on them from past experiences and then responds. Those hormones that I was talking about, like cortisol, stress hormones, those are responsible for increased heart rate, blood pressure, rate of breathing. So those are the things that prepare us to fight back or run away. So in most cases, your body can return to a regulated state. But in situations like PTSD, the recovery can be blocked due to the hormonal levels not decreasing, and thus make your body feel agitated and aroused. Hence the need to want to cope with smoking, drinking, sex, and fighting, right? Because you want to cope with those to get a more calmed outward state. You have all of these that are built up, and then they're just freely flowing hormones telling you to unleash the Kraken, right? I'm sorry. I have to make jokes out of it. It's true, though. You're like, unleash the Kraken. Do it. You have all these emotions, and you're like, let's handle it this way. So this also means that even the slightest off on reading someone can lead to a completely irrational and delusional perception of what the person you're reading is actually feeling. So in my experience, I become triggered by happy people. That's not to say happy people aren't bad. And I try ever so hard to be around happy people now. And I'm not talking about like happy people, like they're genuinely happy. Genuine happiness does not mean that you have to smile and laugh at everything, right? Because just because you smile and laugh does not mean that you are more regulated than somebody that doesn't, right? We don't know what goes on inside their heads. We can only go off of their behaviors, what they say, the way they smile, facial expressions, things like that, right? So the reason I hated happy people and was triggered by them so easily is because it not their happiness, but rather the relationships I've been in where the smiling usually led to violence. For instance, my ex-boyfriend, who was a drug dealer, side note, to this day, I still struggle with why exactly I was with a man like him. But some things you just have to hold yourself and say, we pulled ourselves out of it, right? Because you can diagnose it and analyze it all day, every day, but you'll still get that feeling in the back of your head like, was I really dating that guy? Right? Anyways, going back to what I was saying. So he was the sweetest, which could be why, right? Sweetest, kindest man, so affectionate, smiled a lot. He would literally snap with a snap of the fingers and begin like slapping me, punching me, kicking me, stomping me on the face, kicking me out of my own car, leaving me on the highway to walk miles in the hot sun in the middle of a summer day with no water, no communication source, just because I would tell him no, or just because I didn't tell him something, or I didn't tell him what he wanted to hear. So it didn't even have to be something big, right? It could have been something like, hey, do you remember where I put this? And I say, no, I thought you had it. Even something in the slightest like that led to him being abusive. So when he would get like that, it was like, oh, fuck, I never knew what feeling he actually was feeling because he would be completely calm, but he'd just like start hitting me and he would even laugh. That was the sick part. He would laugh and it was like total disassociation where he just had this like maniacal laugh while he's hitting me as if it didn't even process that it was a serious situation. Right? But then moving further, my ex-husband, he did the same thing. So when I see laughter, he wasn't as bad, but he would laugh and say, well, God can't help you, if I was praying and asking God, like, please, like, get me out of this situation. And my ex-husband is like grabbing me by my hair, pulling me across the room and laughing while he does it. And so when I see someone laughing, especially in a serious situation, and they do like this awkward laugh, right? They mean well, but sometimes when I'm saying something seriously, my reaction is to become defensive and get into fight mode. I'm obviously a lot better at controlling it now, or maybe it's not obvious, I don't know. But for me, I can notice it now, and I can notice this isn't a fight or flight situation. But back then, a couple years ago, before I worked on awareness and calming myself to really analyze and allow time for the reaction to go up to the frontal lobes, right? Instead of just going off the emotions, I'm like, okay, maybe I should just let this happen, right? Let me just sit for a second so it can go to my frontal lobes so I can actually think more clearly. I can do that in some instances. Sometimes I still struggle with it, but in most instances I can still sit there and okay, this is what I need to do. I need to sit for a second, right? But if you don't have that, then you see somebody laughing, like in my instance, I would see that and say, I am not safe. And I would get very defensive and I would start talking shit to that person and put up all walls and just berate them. And it's always going to be there. All right. I just want to emphasize that because it's always going to be there, but it does get easier the more you work on it. And it is very hard because it's almost like you feel weaker, right? But when you feel safe with a person, you can actually go back to that state of calmness and think clearly, right? One crucial thing that Kolk mentions, the frontal lobes are also the seat of empathy, our ability to feel into someone else. So I am working on that one, and it really is a difficult thing, especially when you've been through these traumatic experiences. But you must first understand what's going on, right? But you have to get to that point. You have to get to that point of, I'm safe. This isn't that situation. I'm out of that situation. And it takes practice. It takes work. Okay. I digress. Let's get back to what Kolk says about restoring your balance, right? So he says, as long as you're not too upset, your frontal lobes can restore your balance by helping you realize that you are responding to a fast alarm and abort the stress response. In other words, sometimes there isn't some hidden meaning to it all. Kind of like what I was saying. There isn't some hidden agenda. People aren't out to get you. Sometimes you're just being over fucking dramatic to a completely normal circumstance, right? And then when those big circumstances happen, you can still be prepared for them, but you have to first accept the fact that sometimes you're fucking over dramatic. Learning your body and how to calm it with various coping strategies, such as all the things that I do, ladies, in my program with Unabashedly You, breathwork, meditation, journaling, intentional movement. They can all help you regulate your reactions in high-intensity situations. In order to take control of our senses and impulsivity, we must first understand what is going on. Kolk says in PTSD, they may startle in response to any loud sound, become enraged by small frustrations, freeze when someone touches them. I've experienced all of those, right? I've talked about it before, but loud atmospheres used to be fine with me, or so I thought. But I would be more irritable and combative and didn't even realize it was because the loud sounds reminded me of a man twice my size screaming in my face obscenities, like just screaming. And so when I hear when I'm in those kind of environments, I will feel out of body sometimes. And it's not just from the man screaming obscenities. It's just the overall overstimulation. My body gets in overstimulation mode and it triggers a lot of different traumas. And unless I am grounded and firmly grounded in myself when I'm in those environments, I will feel out of body and I will feel dysregulated, right? So another instance would be like if people call me who needed anything, right? It could have been a teacher. It can be a teacher. When I'm dysregulated, like I said, I'm a lot better at it now, but I didn't have any boundaries because when I did have boundaries, I would get beat for having them. So I stopped having boundaries, but would lash out at things like child's doctor's office for calling me while I was at work, as if I was so busy because they have mind reading abilities, right? I'm like, I am so busy. How dare you? Okay, they don't fucking know that. How are they going to know that? You know, I couldn't just let the call go to voicemail and get back to it later, right? I had to react because I didn't just take a moment to realize the doctor might not know what the fuck's going on, Angela. Then there's the freezing when you're touched. My freezing was a mentally frozen feeling, okay, where I was unable to think or communicate because this feeling of confusion would just flow through me. On one side, I could feel this feeling of home where I craved to be touched, but it was what I knew. But on the other hand, fear would flood through me because I didn't know if the person touching me was going to grab me and hurt me or not. So it just depended on the situation and the atmosphere and how safe I felt with that person. Also, let me just say that I absolutely love that my brain is thinking the same way as this book, even before I read it. Like I just start writing my thoughts and ideas, right? And then while I'm reading the book, like I'll write notes, but then I read further and I realize that Kolk is going the same path as me. He's thinking the same things. He's processing the same way. He's like, oh, let's try this. I'm like, oh my God, I was just thinking that. It's crazy how he spent years researching to help others, but I lived the life of the researcher, right? I lived the life, not the life of the researcher, the life of the trauma person that he was researching. So it's like both aspects, right? I know there's not many people who are willing to be vulnerable and talk about all of this, but I think that it's essential, right? But when I decided to change my career and start my own business, I knew exactly what I wanted to bring to the table. I wanted to bring my own life and experiences so others could see through my eyes and heal from my experiences. So I just find it super fascinating that we're able to live, learn, grow, right? Anyway, so Kolk talks about how breathing, meditation, yoga, touch, they all help to regulate from the top down, right? We said that. So another thing to recall is that he says that breathing is both conscious and autonomic. So he starts mentioning all these things that I already said it. And he's like, hey, by the way, this is why we say it over and over again to our kids, to breathe when they're upset. But we forget that, right? One thing that I really, truly love is Kolk saying emotion is not opposed to reason. Our emotions assign value to experiences and thus are the foundation of reason. Our self-experience is the product of the balance between our rational and irrational brains. When these are in balance, we feel most like ourselves. The reason I love that so much is because it's okay to have emotions, right? It's okay to have experiences. It's okay to not be okay. But when we can have a balance between our rational and emotional brains, we can feel most like ourselves. Our self-experience is the product of the balance between our rational and emotional brains. That is where we need to accept. It is hard to be rational when we are so emotionally distraught. And it's not your fault. When they aren't in balance, we're overly triggered, unable to control the outbursts that are within us. I think it's also interesting, okay, that he also talks about like psychiatrists, right? They usually try to help people use he says they usually try to help people use insight and understanding to manage their behavior. However, neuroscience research shows that very few psychological problems are the result of defects in understanding. Most originate in pressures from deeper regions in the brain that drive our perception and attention. I find that so fucking fascinating because for me, therapy was so hard because I understood that my behavior wasn't a good behavior, a quote unquote good behavior, right? But I kept doing it no matter how much understanding I truly had. In the moments of the triggering, there was really nothing that could bring it down. It wasn't until I actually got to the root cause and really saw that younger version of myself and all the trauma I had gone through, but from an empathetic viewpoint, that I could really forgive and heal from the chaos from within and truly feel the changes from within my body. I was reliving this experiences over and over in my mind because I had no resolution. So simply understanding what was going on was not enough. I knew and could understand all that had happened to me, but reliving it over and over in my brain and reacting impulsively or erratically to find some sense of control left me feeling irritable, constantly fatigued, and overwhelmed without known cause. I can't tell you this how deeply this right here that I'm about to say hit for me, okay? Not being able to deeply take in what is going on around them makes it impossible to feel fully alive. It becomes harder to feel the joys and aggravations of ordinary life, harder to concentrate on the tasks at hand. Not being fully alive in the present keeps them more firmly imprisoned in the past. These intense emotions make people feel crazy and like they don't belong to the human race. My children have struggled with this, and it took me a long time to find the association. They couldn't understand why other kids didn't have the same thoughts or feelings they did. They struggled with acceptance and self-validation. It's taken a lot of work and help from a whole team of people in order to help them feel like who they are is all right and to accept themselves and hold themselves when others can't. But they still struggle because it's a process. With that, going back to like my daughter, right? Her feeling desensitized because feeling numb is another reaction that you have. When you're desensitized to emotional moments like birthdays or marriages or funerals, maybe you laugh when a thoughtful story is shared or roll your eyes because hearing compassion, care, or concern is unknown, unfamiliar. So you shame, blame, and push it all away from you, your own feelings, and disassociate from it all. You may not even realize you have an issue because you've done things the same way for so long and no one's died from it, right? But when you look at your relationships around you and how numb you are to experiences or from feeling your emotions and looking at it from a movie perspective where you are watching your own life, you see how you've disassociated from truly communicating and dealing with things because feeling feelings was uncommon to you or unacceptable behavior in your family. This is where therapy comes in. Okay, so I'm not downing therapy. You must bring those behaviors and feelings to light in order to be able to take the steps associated with after therapy and understanding what to do now that they're in the light. Kolk says the challenge is not so much learning to accept the terrible things that have happened, but learning how to gain mastery over one's internal sensations and emotions. Sensing, naming, and identifying what is going on is the first step to recovery. Remember, that is the first step. Hence, my after therapy program that I created for moms to regain who they are and what they do after therapy and become a whole and complete version of themselves and reclaim their power. You have to become in control of your trauma and the emotions associated with it because you've let them control you and your behaviors and patterns for too long. It's not an easy fix. It's not a quick fix. It's not something you can just snap your fingers with. It is a process. You have let it control you to the point where you are consistently seeking validation and acceptance from everyone because you can't seem to accept yourself on your own. It takes strength, courage, acceptance, vulnerability, accountability, all of those things. But the most important thing is to remind yourself that it's not your fault, to accept yourself as you are for who you are. You've got to stop letting your past define your future. Accept change. Accept defeat. Accept that you cannot do it on your own and get the help that you need. And with that, I hope you guys have a good fucking rest of your day. Next week, we're going to be talking about, brain-body connections. It's all connected in the great circle of our lives. It doesn't say that, but that's what we'll be talking about. So you guys have a wonderful day. I look forward to talking to you later. Bye.